Afternoon, friends. So we are starting with the post-lunch session. And to start off the post-lunch session, I'll be inviting Shashikant. Friends, every industry, particularly in financial services, is based on what we call intellectual capital. It's based on knowledge, right? We don't produce any physical goods. We don't manufacture anything. We are in the business of providing intellectual capital in a manner of speaking. And if there is one person who's done to enhance the quantum of intellectual capital in this business, it is Shashikant. How many of you have heard her earlier? Okay. How many of you have attended her training sessions? So great. And besides this audience, I'll also share with you a lot of stalwarts in the AMC business have been trained by Shashikant. It is because of her that we have a much richer, much more knowledgeable industry. As you know, runs her own business, CIEL. So without much ado, may I invite Uma. So let's have a big round of applause for Uma.
All right. Thanks, Prem, for inviting me to be here. And thank you so much for all of you to have taken the time to stay and do this. Now, I have another 20 minutes in which I have to talk to you about investor education, or how can you use investor education in your business. So, all right. So we're trying to say that in your business with the customers, very clearly research has shown again and again that your investors are looking up to you for being educated. The primary source of education to the investor is the advisor, right? Whether it happens formally or informally is not very clearly defined in research, but it is well known that investors depend on advisors for education. Now, this is not a very onerous responsibility. Many times advisors ask me, if they depend on us, what is it that we are expected to do? Or aren't they being exposed to the television, to the other media campaigns, or to things that producers may tell them? So many times we are on the defensive because they already come with a few pre-known, preset ideas. And more than educating them, there is a huge process of unlearn, in a sense. In the time that I have with me, about 20 minutes and another 10 minutes for interactions, etc., what I'm going to do is, I'm going to present you a small set of examples of what you can do in terms of investor education and how you prepare yourself, all right? So I'll begin off by showing you. I know this is not a great post-lunch read, okay? Now this is how mutual funds, investment houses, or experts will present their view. So what does it say? Divergent economic growth and monetary policy underpin the 2015 base case, tightening of financial conditions in US, UK due to pickup in growth, and then improving labor markets, lackluster growth and low expectations for looser monetary policies, and falling oil prices. So typically what happens is, this is the format in which expert opinion, because I would always suggest that when you are seeking to take inputs to your investors, do not go by news reports and media primarily. Use them as sources of information, but for sources of expertise, go back and see what experts are saying. Now, what can we make out of this? I would suggest that for an advisor to take an educational loan, you must develop this, what I call as interpretative intelligence. That is, you don't really have the time for fundamental research of your own. Nor can you generate, large amount of research to be able to the database to work, because you have your work to do, you have your customers to take care of, you have your business to take care of. What you can do is, you can identify sources of expertise in which the language, as I showed you in the previous slide, this is the language in which this is appearing. But what is it saying? All it is saying is that one of the top risks in 2015 is the fact that some countries like US, which have seen growth, might be increasing interest rates, while some others like Japan and UK, which are still not reviving, might be reducing rates. So you have a situation where there is a difference. That's what this report is saying. So you can actually convert this into these 4 or 5 key points. What are these? That the big risk that we are seeing in 2015 is that there is a difference in growth rates and therefore difference in monetary policy. And then it also points out about falling oil prices. Now clearly, when we say divergence and falling oil prices, what are we referring to? We are referring to the fact that oil importing countries like India will benefit because we are buyers of oil and low price is going to be good for us. But countries like Russia, which are exporters of oil, will suffer because they are sellers of oil and they will now get a lower realization. So my first point for you, ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon is to say, develop interpretative intelligence. There's nothing wrong in interpreting somebody else's work for your investor, because in your profession, you're not expected to make those investments. In terms of investments of time, energy, resources, there are advisors who have, young MBAs who are writing reports for them. My problem is, how will this guy match the expertise of a fund manager who's looking at multiple markets and immensely better qualified and immensely better experienced in terms of perspective? So don't make that investment, and this MBA child is going to get sooner or later disillusioned working out of a small advisor's office. So it's much better that, we look at ways by which we can begin to interpret what looks like tough work for our investors. Let me show you another example. Now this is, this is the expert view that is published on, like mutual funds are publishing every month, the view where market overview, they bring out literature, they bring out commentaries. So what is being said here? Corporate earnings are expected to pick up going ahead and may be led by both top line growth and margin expansion. Moreover, one important indicator, namely corporate profitability, to GDP is currently below the long period average. It's expected to improve in line with overall economic growth. Your investor is not going to read this. You're not going to consume this, correct? But what you can do is to pick something up like this and convert it like this. In this bull run, corporate profitability is lagging behind, correct? And what is happening is corporate profits to GDP is below the average that we know. Therefore, if and when economic growth picks up, that seems to be a matter of statistics today. So if and when the economic growth picks up, what is it likely to happen? That corporate growth might also pick up, and this pickup in corporate growth, so therefore what is it that you have to look for? In the current year, what you should be looking for are whether sales growth is happening and whether margins are becoming better. So in other words, over a period of time, I'm saying that, I'm not saying do all of it, but I'm saying that there are readily available expert views that are available in the press, in the television, in printed material, in fund managers' commentaries, in blogs, correct? Choose who you want to follow. Choose what you want to read. This is a tip which I provide many people in the classrooms as well, where I'm saying, if you're reading the newspaper, please read only the headline and the first para. The story is over there. Rest of it is PR. Okay? So do not spend too much time reading the first page particularly, in great detail. Read only the opinion, because those who are writing the editorial, the op-ed, the invited columns in a paper are those who the editors have invited to write for them because they believe they are experts. So you choose who you want to, whether it is Subir Gokaran's columns that you want to look at, or whether it is Surjit Balla's columns that you want to look at, but choose a few that you like to follow those columns, convert and develop an interpretative intelligence where you will convert these into smaller, simpler takeaways, which you will continuously use in your conversation. And considering that many of these are recurring columns and writings, you will have a new set of ideas to talk about your investor. So assume that this is something that you're reading on every Thursday of the week. So every Friday, you have a set of 4 new points to talk to your customers over the weekend. you will realize that over a period of time, what you're doing is you're reading on behalf of the customer. The customer is beginning to expect you because you are providing knowledge in a capsule for which they don't have time. You must remember, everybody wants to look smart here. Everybody wants to look knowledgeable. Is that right? So if it is possible, so my first point therefore is interpretative intelligence. All right. But the second one which I want to talk to you about is this whole idea. I mean, this is what I said right now, which is to say that the customer is looking up to you. So you should say that my positioning in the mind of the customer should be like that of an expert, correct? But you are not passing off as someone who knows the market. What is the expert conversations we have these commonly in the marketplace? To my mind, there are only two kind of expert conversations. These are not expert, that's why I'm using my hands, all right? First one is what? People will throw names. I have seen advisors who talk as if Naren is their friend. Correct? People will throw names. They will correct one. Or second, they will behave as if they've actually been there and done that. I invested this, I did this. So there are advisors who will try to tell the customers that they're actually in the market buying and selling. Both these are bound to fail. These are not ways to build expertise. Because your investor sooner than later will figure that either that you are not what you are making yourself out to be. So it is much better and much more efficient to accept this point that, look, I'm an advisor. I'm expected to be abreast of what is happening. My expertise is interpreting what is going on in the market for you. You don't have to state it in so many words. But if you choose this plank, it is ethical, it is nice, and it is sustainable, right? So you don't have to lean on Prashant Jain yesterday and Naren tomorrow. You can stand on your own feet, yeah? So that's the first point I wanted to make. Then the second one is the whole idea of number. See, we must remember in customer education, investor education, financial literacy, that investors don't like numbers. Numeracy is a big problem. The moment you start talking numbers, the person in front of you is most likely to shut down and shut off and not be interested. But the truth is, finance is a good amount of numbers, right? Now, clearly, it is important that an advisor is able to do his or her own research. But where is the time? Right? There is not enough time to be able to. So, sometimes tables of this kind. Now, this is a table from a mutual fund where the mutual fund is saying, this is the amount of return my fund made last 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, etc. This is what the benchmark made, this is what the second benchmark made, and so on and so forth. Now, you must remember that a mutual fund communication is driven by compliance requirements given by SEBI. You still don't have it, right? That's your advantage. You are free today as an advisor to pick up that information and, importantly, ethically. You shouldn't pass off, right? Ethically use that information to make a point. Now, of all the information that is given here, what do we care about? We care about what was the fund's return like and what was the benchmark's return like. And we don't have to choose both Sensex and Nifty. We can just convert this, just 5 points of data. We can just convert this into the simple picture. Correct? The question is, I'm not saying that you take this picture to the investor. Once you have this picture, so there are 2 steps to this. There is published information which is coming with a lot of footnotes and disclaimers and, statutory with all its noise, which is not making sense. Most advisors follow what I call the lazy approach, where you're just copying and pasting that information, or you're using the same thing, or you're replicating the same thing. I'm saying just take that small effort to simplify it, right? Now here, there are so many stories that you can tell, right? For example, if you looked at this, you can look at a simple story where you're saying the 1 year return is higher, the 3-year return is lower, the 5-year return is still lower, the 10-year return is much lower. So what is it that we clearly know? We are standing at the top of the market. Very clear. Because all this is last 10 years, last 5 years, last 7 years. Correct? So if you're standing on the top of the market, what is it that would happen? You've just come from a market which is low, right? So longer term returns will be smaller than shorter term returns. Is that right? So if you want to make, now this is where I will bring in this idea of the 3-step approach, as I call it, in education, right? There are 3 things that you can do in education. One is concept, second is information, third is soundbite. Soundbite is what? Just a smart thing to say. Correct? Long term is better than short term. Correct? Or for the last 27 years the fund has done, if an investor who invested in this fund in 27 years has got a huge outperformance, for example. Or the long-term return is 15%, you're providing information. Or this idea of returns depend on market cycles. You make your choice based on two things: what you can handle, what your customer can handle. If you're the guy whose concept is weak, don't go there. You don't have to go out in the world and say, no, my concept is weak. But from this, pick up, okay, from this, what is the thing that I want to pick up? If you want to just pick up the first part, where you're saying that the last 1 year return for the fund was 40%, correct? Now the question is that if you did this, what is it that you would know if you are an experienced advisor? It's a fairly risky way to sell, because if you say the return is 40%, your investor is going to expect this kind of return going forward. So you would say, rather than pick up that, I would pick up this 5, 7, 10 ka numbers and say, look, if you're an equity, 15% is what you should expect. And instead of saying, this is what I'm saying, what would you say? Look, what is the kind of return to get? Look at this. You know, if the market is good, you can even do 30, 40%. But nobody knows. Market can fall, go up, etc. You will make about 15%. But see, if you waited for a long period of time, this is the kind of return that you may be able to make. So you can build your conversation conceptually. You can build your conversation just based on information, or you can build your conversation based on just one idea which you believe will appeal to your investor. Very important is your judgment is only as good as information that backs it. Which means do not get into empty statements with customers. Don't simply tell them market will go up, market will come down. Use the fund house information to back you. There is published information which they've already done. So pick up that information, create small outputs like this, and use that to back what you're trying to tell the customer. Now here I have just created a picture. You can have various ways in which you can use your creativity to do it in various ways, right? Now, this is published information about discovery. All right? Now, you can use this in various ways. You can simply say, now, if you were talking about a sound bite, you would say, look, the fund's NAV was 10 rupees when in inception in 2006, and the fund is now, its NAV now is 100 rupees. Correct? You're using actual information to tell the investor how the return of the fund has moved. Or you can build a more deeper story in terms of saying, look, it was 10, it went up like this, and then it fell like this, and then it revived like this, but then, you know, this is where it is now. Correct? So you can use only, you don't have to say CAGR. If you cut and pasted what the mutual fund gave you, you might be talking about the CAGR. But what you would do if you did a little bit of your own work of pulling out some information from this, only the NAV and its movement, only the fund's performance and the benchmark's performance. So that is the second important skill, which is using numbers to back your story in a manner that does not throw off your investor. Don't go to the investor with too many numbers. Don't make your talk too much with numbers, but remember, anything in finance has to have numeracy. So efficiently use data that is provided either by the fund house or by research agencies that do analysis of funds. I would believe that in terms of an education strategy for the investor, if you did interpretative intelligence on one side and judgment based on numbers on the other side, over a period of time, the amount of trust that the investor will have in what you're saying can only go up, and he'll slowly begin to see you as an expert. What I will do now is, so this is the first part of what I want to say. What I will do now is this, what I said. I will talk to you about the approach, all right? As I said, you know, suppose your customer thinks too much of himself. So you will go and tell the customer, you know, your customer asks you, will the market go up? You will say, you know, we have only seen PE expansion. Earnings have to match. Customer will just keep quiet, huh? Because you have said something and you are not explaining. You have thrown a term at the customer, correct? You are trying to get him involved in a conversation by just throwing that statement at him. Customer does not want to look beyond bank deposit and gold. You have to take a conceptual orientation of saying, you know, if Infosys is a good company for your son to get employed in after studying engineering, it should be a good company to invest his money as well, right? So you might want to take, so whether you go take a conceptual approach or whether you take a information-based approach, which means you're just using numbers to tell your story, or you're just dropping a line, will depend on what your customer likes to hear, and what you are most comfortable with. My suggestion to you here would be, utilizing the platform Prem has provided me to, hold forth on this, is to say, be honest about your identity. Don't try to be what you're not. Yeah? And don't try to make market forecasting as a sign of expertise. It's never. The best thing to say is, we really don't know, but we can prepare. All right? So, choose your plank. Now, how are you going to, ultimately, you're going to use expertise and education to build trust. That's really the objective we have. Now, there are various ways in which we can do it. And as I said, you have to invest in it to acquire it, which means either you're investing money to educate yourself about something, or you're just investing time, or you're investing in resources which will create something for you. But you must have a clear strategy to make some investment towards acquiring this expertise in terms of number of minutes of reading, or amount of time, or amount of subscriptions, or amount of actual investments that you will make. Do not keep choosing everything that comes your way. Always choose what you want to do in terms of what it will do to your business. So that's the first thing. Now, what I've listed below are all choices. You have to make the choice there. Ideally, you will move from the bottom to the top. For example, suppose you want to tell the investor that, look, the markets have moved ahead in anticipation of better earnings, but corporate earnings are still not good. Correct? Which means at this point of time, the market has run ahead of itself. Correct? So, what you want to therefore say is, do you want to use this in your direct conversation with the customer? Or do you want to create a communication in the form of a mail or a newsletter? Do you want to put it in social media? Do you want to use your Facebook page, your Twitter handle to be able to say this, your LinkedIn pages to say this? Do you want to create your own in-house publications where every week you're sending an e-newsletter? Do you want to make this opinion in small classrooms, roundtables you will have for your customer? Do you want to do it in a conference? Or do you want to, be out there writing in the press? Ideally, advisors should move from the bottom to the top, from a position where you are talking about these things to your investors in conversations, to getting to the point where you're able to write in the press, not because you have a very good PR agent, but because you have reached a point of thought leadership where people care about what you have got to say. But you have to make your choice, and you have to be honest about where you are in this hierarchy. But you have to begin somewhere. You can't kind of be here and there, and there are people who routinely write to me saying that, I want to write in the press, how should I do it? I'm saying, I don't know, I was invited to write. The editor called me and said, write. I don't have a PR agent, but then the problem is that people somehow think that being in the press is the best way to get business. That might be true, but you have to think of something to write every week, right? So you have to make your choice on, the same thing is true about social media and others, right? And you also have to see from whatever you're telling your customer. There are many who send customers return reports, highlights. I'm saying from whatever you have read or done, choose ways in which you will communicate this. For example, you might want to send an SMS to the customer on something, which you believe you are able to interpret, which is important to them. Now, you must remember that whether it is current information, whether it is an interesting event, whether it is highlight, whatever you have chosen, whatever mode you have chosen, these are the things you want to look at. Correct? In other words, I as a writer, I'm all the time looking for stories. If someone tells me something, I'm saying, okay, this is a tidbit. I want to keep this and I want to develop this into the story. And what is my medium of communication? My weekly column. So somewhere your information gathering strategy and your publication strategy should be aligned. So you can't be doing too many things here and then finding that you don't have a place for publishing them. So please have these have clarity on how your outputs are going to be and how they're going to add value, which means, what is it that you will do? You will keep reinforcing in the mind of the customer that you're doing something, and you will get approval for what you're doing, and you will get appreciation, which will keep you going. Which brings me to the last slide, right? Which is this. Every one of us knows all the investing principles: diversification, asset allocation, long-term investing, SIP, and so on. Create your identity. What is your story? What is it that you want people to be associated? What is the difference you want to make to your customer? Right? Instead of saying, I have seen advisor websites where they say, elaborate things, we enable you, solution-oriented approach. It means nothing to the investor. What you will do? What is your identity? I will give you the example of SIP Patil of Hubli. SIP Patil is a simple man, advisor from Hubli. He does only 10-year SIPs in diversified equity funds. That's the only product he sells. He has 4,000 clients. Simple. Very clear identity. Wherever he goes in Hubli, people know him as SIP Patil. Create that identity, right? Something that you stand for, something which is your distinct style, something which customers know that you are known to talk about. Pick up an idea, which is your favorite idea, and use that idea again and again. Talk about it again and again. And, make sure that you're doing it in a way in which it is ethical, and people believe that you don't have an agenda when you do it. It is difficult. It's easy for me because I don't sell any products. So people tell me, Uma, you're ethical. I'm saying I'm not selling anything. But when you're selling something, right, it becomes even more difficult because selling means showing something in good light. So being ethical and observing a code of conduct builds trust. So decide where you stand in terms of saying that and adhere to those do's and don'ts, which means customers should slowly understand you are the person to go to if I am looking for, this particular advice or this particular expertise or this particular action. It is fine to have that identity because that identity builds into expertise. And I'll end by saying all of this is about communication and connect. I've had an IFA tell me, Madam, मैं सब कुछ जानता हूँ पर बात नहीं कर सकता हूँ. I say, you're in the wrong profession. Communication is key. You have to learn, pick up that skill of talking to your